A Florida mother has killed her 2 children after losing a custody battle with her ex. This is Brandy Hutchins, and this past Thursday she lost custody of her 10-year-old son, Aiden. She was due to hand him over to his father by 6 p.m. on Friday, but she never showed up. With that, a frantic search began over the weekend for Brandy, Aiden, and her 19-year-old daughter, Hannah. Police have said that social media then led them to a Lake Wales trailer around 12:30 p.m. on Sunday. As we know, tragically, Brandy and her kids were all found deceased inside. It was reportedly apparent that she had murdered them before suffering a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Aside from that, we know Aiden was just days away from getting to live with his father in Maine. Hannah had a different father, but social media is filled with tributes to her life as well. Finally, we know that police have said, quote, "What's interesting about this is that Brandy has no criminal history and there's no indication she could have been violent. We deal with hundreds of thousands of court orders, and for one to turn out like this is almost never, but never happened today."
We didn't complain when you tied our hands. Okay, you have everything that I have. We have done everything that you've asked. It's okay.
She tied you loose, didn't she? Get on your stomach so I can tie your feet.
Okay. It gets really cold out here at night. We could freeze. Okay, you all done? You know, just because people are going to ask, was that thing even loaded?
It's okay. This is all going to be okay.
Natalie Martin has tragically been found murdered on her senior trip to Myrtle Beach. Natalie just graduated in Ohio, and this past week she and a group of friends were on vacation celebrating. This included her ex-boyfriend, 18-year-old Blake Linkus. Again, tragically, on Wednesday police received a call reporting a deceased woman at a hotel on Mason Drive. There, they found the victim to be 18-year-old Natalie. Police, quote, "detected suspicious circumstances and then determined that she had been strangled the night before." From here, investigators collected evidence at the scene along with witness statements. This led to Blake's arrest, with police saying, quote, "Blake Linkus did with malice aforethought cause the death of Natalie Martin. The defendant did so by manually strangling the victim." According to a close friend of Natalie's, she and Blake had been a couple for several years up until recently, but the two had reportedly remained friends. So while a motive remains unknown, we know that Blake is being held without bail at a detention center in South Carolina. According to the superintendent from their high school, this was not a school-sanctioned event. It is, quote, "a common destination for graduating students in the area." Natalie is described as a free, pure, and wild spirit with a contagious laugh who had a personality out of this world that could bring anyone out of their darkest days. If you can or want to help, the link to her GoFundMe will be in my bio. 3 young brothers have tragically been killed by their own father. Around 4 p.m. on Thursday, police in New Richmond, Ohio received 2 alarming phone calls. One from a mother screaming that her babies had been shot, and another reporting a little girl running down the street yelling that her father was killing everyone. When police got to the scene, they found 3 boys, aged 3, 4, and 7, all deceased from gunshot wounds. Medics, quote, "attempted to perform CPR and then held the children knowing there was nothing more they could do." Horribly, we now know that Chad Dorman had lined his 3 sons up in the yard and executed them with a rifle. One of them actually tried to run away into a field, but Chad, quote, "hunted him down, brought him back to the house, and killed him." As for Chad's wife, she suffered a gunshot wound to the hand while trying to save her kids. It was his stepdaughter who was running down the street, but thankfully police have confirmed she is safe. So Chad was seen in court on Friday, where it was revealed that he has already admitted to both planning and carrying out the murders. He's being held on a $20 million bond, with the state saying they cannot think of a person who poses a greater threat to their community. That Chad was his son's entire world, and he executed them in cold blood. As of today, a preliminary hearing in the case is scheduled for June 26th. Prosecutors promise they're reviewing all possible charges and that they will do all they can to ensure the defendant never sees the light of day.
The man behind me is the real-life human Dracula. His name is Tsutomu Miyazaki. He was born with a deformity that fused his wrists with his hands, so he was bullied a ton growing up. Then one day, later on in adulthood in 1988, something snapped in him. He started abducting little children, specifically little girls, and engaging in necrophilia. He would strangle his victims to death and then engage with their corpse. He would even go as far as removing some of their body parts like their hands and feet and even their teeth. One way that made him also very similar to Jeffrey Dahmer, he would pose these bodies in different ways and photograph them. On one of his last instances before he got caught, he drank the blood of a little girl, and then right after that he ate her hand. One day he was at the playground trying to take pictures of more little kids, and the father intervened and stopped him. So Mr. Dracula behind me fled on foot, naked, and was caught by the cops later on. That's when they discovered his disturbing collection of photos and body parts inside of his apartment. However, he blamed it on his alter ego named the Rat Man. They were not playing any games with this guy, they immediately sentenced him to death. The government hung him on June 17th of 2008. Let me know what you guys think about the Rat Man or Dracula in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
Everyone should know about what has happened to Rachel Morin. Rachel was a mom of 5, last seen on Saturday when she left for her usual hike on the Ma and Pa Trail. At 11:20 p.m., when she still hadn't returned, her boyfriend Richard reported her missing. Come search efforts on Sunday, Rachel's car was tragically found still at the trailhead. And then around 1 p.m., a volunteer searcher found her body in the woods. According to local police, they have no video footage from the parking lot that night. They say this was a part of Rachel's normal exercise routine and, quote, "It could be someone who came to learn that routine and knew where she might be, or it could be a random attack." Aside from that, we know that Rachel started dating her new boyfriend just about a week ago. He has since taken to Facebook to announce that while he has a criminal past, he would never hurt Rachel. And this criminal past actually consists of 26 prior convictions. Charges like second-degree assaults, violating restraining orders, malicious destruction of property, resisting arrest, being a fugitive from justice, and drug possession. Regardless, right now police are adamant that they don't have any suspects. And if you saw my post in May on Lauren Heike, you know this could be horribly similar. She was found murdered on a Phoenix hiking trail after being attacked by a complete stranger. If you would like to donate in Rachel's name, all proceeds will go towards her service and then to her 5 children. The family is experiencing back-to-back losses following the passing of her baby niece just last week. A 5-year-old girl has been killed at a homeless camp after being kicked out of her family's home. Last Monday, authorities responded to a 911 call for an injured girl at a Topeka gas station. They were at the scene in less than 2 minutes, but tragically, Zoe Felix was pronounced deceased at 6:39 p.m. It was reportedly clear she had been assaulted and murdered, with the investigation immediately moving over to a nearby field or homeless camp. As we now know, just a few weeks ago, the 5-year-old was kicked out by her mother. So were other family members and a family friend named Michael Cherry, who Zoe was then forced to live with in a tent at the camp. Michael ultimately took her life there and has since been charged with her murder. According to Zoe's old neighbors, she wasn't enrolled in school this year, and they had taken care of her needs for food, clothing, and bathing. They contacted CPS countless times about the house being covered in dog feces and having no power, but nothing was done. As for Zoe's mom, she was placed on probation in November after driving under the influence with Zoe in the car and then injuring her in a car accident. Police have responded to 23 calls at her home in the past 2 years, with the most recent being September 5th for a child living without any utilities. It was less than a month before Zoe was killed, and somehow it was decided that all was well. Today, people everywhere are protesting for Zoe, as this couldn't have been more preventable. The GoFundMe has since been disabled as the funeral home has offered to pay for the service, but there are petitions you can sign in hopes of some justice and accountability in this case. We have a lot of new information on what has happened to the Patel family. If you've been following, you know it was a miracle the Patels survived crashing hundreds of feet off the San Mateo coast. Dharmesh Patel has since pleaded not guilty, with newly released documents revealing his version of what happened. Dharmesh has told investigators that on the morning of January 2nd, his family was driving to Montara, where his brother lives. He went on to say that leading up to the crash, he had already stopped at 3 gas stations because the Tesla dashboard sensors were indicating low pressure. So per Dharmesh's statements, when the family got to the Pacific Coast Highway, the car began to, quote, feel different. He claims that when they went off the cliff, he was actually trying to pull over to check for a flat tire. The thing is, after hours of waiting for rescue, Neha Patel immediately and repeatedly told an officer, quote, he drove off, he's depressed, he's a doctor. He said he was going to drive off the cliff, he drove off on purpose. This completely supports witness testimony and the state's case, arguing that Dharmesh very clearly pulled a U-turn before driving off. We also now know that while recovering in the hospital, Dharmesh was asked about said depression. He said he wasn't really, but was feeling down because times are bad in the world between war and drugs. You may have also heard that Dharmesh's wife doesn't want her husband in jail, but I do want to clarify this statement comes from his attorney. Those actually working the case have said, quote, regardless of whether she is cooperative, we believe we have sufficient evidence to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. So with that, Dharmesh is expected to be seen back in court for a hearing on June 12th. From what I can tell, he's still ordered to have no contact with family, but all of the new information here comes from a 3-page court affidavit released last week. A 9-year-old girl has presumably been abducted, and the search has just entered a critical stage. If you've been following, you know this weekend Charlotte's family was on a 2-night camping trip at Moreau Lake State Park. She was here biking Loop A with her friends Saturday evening, but decided to go around just one last time by herself. When Charlotte didn't return to their site 15 minutes later, her parents say they immediately knew something was up. They began calling her name, and other campers joined in their search, but at 6:45, her bike alone was found in that loop. Her mother then reported her missing just 2 minutes later. Yesterday morning, an Amber Alert was issued stating that Charlotte was, quote, taken under circumstances that lead police to believe she is in imminent danger of serious harm or death. Reportedly, the alert only took so long because they had to exhaust all search efforts in the park and determine that an abduction was a real possibility. Today, the FBI joined in the efforts, which includes rescue teams, bloodhounds, drones, and technology experts to analyze other forms of communication at the park. The hope is obviously to reunite Charlotte with her family, but with it being nearly 48 hours, it has reached a critical point in the investigation. And as for what this area looks like where Charlotte went missing, it's this loop right by the park office. Google Earth shows that from Loop A, you can actually see through the trees to that main road, Old Saratoga. As for Charlotte, she was just a 4th grader from Greenfield and was recently elected to be a class officer for her student council. Less than 1% of missing children in America are abducted by a stranger, but horribly, police believe that is the case. Charlotte is described as 5'1" and 90 pounds, last seen wearing dark blue pants, an orange tie-dye Pokemon t-shirt, black Crocs sandals, and a gray bike helmet. Anyone with information is asked to immediately contact the number or email above. Jared Bridegan's ex-wife has finally been charged with his murder. If you know Jared's case, you know he was a Microsoft executive living in Jacksonville with his wife and 4 kids. 2 of those kids are twins he shared with his ex-wife Shanna, who divorced him after she cheated with her personal trainer. It had reportedly been an ongoing custody battle for years. We now know on February 16th, Jared was driving home from a custody exchange at Shanna's when he came across a tire in the middle of the road. He had his 2-year-old Bexley in the back seat, and his killer knew he would get out to clear the roadway. He was immediately shot to death at close range. That night, Jared's wife Kirsten, his ex-wife Shanna, and her new husband Mario would have been the only people to know his route. But when the first arrest came in the case 8 months ago, it was a man named Henry Tienon. As it turns out, Henry was renting a room from Mario in Jacksonville just before the murder. And with that, it became clear they had hired him to kill Jared. Come March, Mario too was arrested for his role in the case. And then this week, Shanna was too. She's charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and child abuse as she put Bexley in harm's way. She was indicted on Friday, and in a rare move is actually fighting her extradition back to Florida from Washington. And if you've been following this case, you know this arrest was a long time coming. After Jared was killed, Shanna kept the twins home from his funeral and then moved them across the country to Washington. Since then, she has not once allowed them to see their siblings or Kirsten. As for what will happen to the twins, Kirsten very clearly wants to be reunited, but I don't know. This is the statement from Shanna's parents, the ones who went on vacation with Shanna, Mario, and the twins just after Jared was killed. For more details, updates, and what's going on with the twins, you can go to this page that Kirsten has made, Justice for Jared B.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
More information has come out on the horrific attack of Adam Simji and Michaela Paulus. Last August, Adam and Michaela were enjoying a last-minute road trip through Alabama before starting classes at Central Florida. They were driving through the Talladega National Forest looking for waterfalls when a young woman flagged them down on the side of the road and asked for help. As we now know, 21-year-old Yasmin Hilder would tell the couple that her car was broken down an eighth of a mile away. So the students followed her to her car and tried to use jumper cables to get it started. Michaela even called her dad for advice, who had years of experience as a mechanic. At this point, reportedly out of nowhere, Yasmin pulled a gun and told the couple to, quote, empty out their pockets and walk further into the woods. Adam responded by saying that everything they had was in their van and she could have it. He pulled out his own gun, at which point Yasmin asked if he was serious and opened fire. As gunfire erupted, we know Adam suffered a single fatal shot to the abdomen. Michaela could have been killed next, but somehow she managed to find her phone, call 911, use her shirt to make a tourniquet for her boyfriend's wound, and attempt to perform CPR. 30 minutes later, police finally arrived at the scene, where they were confronted by a 5-year-old boy with a loaded pistol. As it turns out, Yasmin, her accomplice, and said son were all living off-grid in what's being described as a base camp about a half-mile from the scene. Both women were arrested, and thankfully, the young boy dropped the weapon and was placed into state custody. This week, Yasmin pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, robbery, and kidnapping, and was subsequently sentenced to 35 years. Her car had actually been broken down there for months, and while she did intend to rob them, she says it was never supposed to turn out the way it did. Adam is described as being there for anyone and everyone, whether it was helping someone on the side of the road or being there for the people he loved when they needed him most. The GoFundMe for his service has since been closed, but all future donations will go towards Michaela's counseling. The man accused of kidnapping and murdering Anaya Blanchard has pleaded not guilty. If you don't know, in 2019, Anaya was abducted from an Auburn gas station. Witnesses saw this man force her into her vehicle, but he maintains his innocence. We now know that on October 23rd, Anaya and her brother had made the 2-hour trip from college to visit their family in Homewood. She dropped her brother off back in Auburn around 11, and then at 11:09 texted her roommate that she was almost back to their place. The thing is, we now know that Anaya didn't go straight home. Shortly after sending that message, she was seen on surveillance footage at a Chevron gas station. Right behind her was convicted felon Ibrahim Yazid. By 11:40, Anaya had messaged her roommate again, saying that she was hanging out with this guy named Eric, who she had just met. Then at 11:47, her phone activity just stopped. It was all completely out of character. When Anaya didn't come home that night, everyone just knew something was wrong. 2 days of searching went by, and then on the 25th, Anaya's Honda CR-V was found abandoned in Montgomery. There was a bullet hole in the passenger side door and enough blood to suggest she'd suffered a serious injury. So at this point, foul play was already suspected. Authorities released a photo of their suspect on the 6th, and the following day he was identified as 29-year-old Ibrahim Yazid. Ibrahim was arrested hiding out in Florida and had just been freed on bond for robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Tragically, it was a few weeks later on the 25th when Anaya's remains were found in Macon County. She died of a single gunshot wound to the head, with prosecutors alleging that she, quote, went for the gun just before she was shot. With this discovery, Ibrahim's charges were upgraded to murder. Again, this man had been released despite trying to kill 2 police officers, shooting a woman in the face, and being convicted of killing another man. Today, Ibrahim pleads not guilty to the murder of 19-year-old Anaya Blanchard. His defense argues that there is no proof the time spent between them was non-consensual. And for those wanting to learn more about Anaya's story or Anaya's Law, the link to her foundation will be in my bio. Rachel Del Tondo's former student has been named the prime suspect in her case. If you don't know, in 2018, Rachel was a suspended teacher in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. On May 13th, she went out for ice cream with a friend, not knowing someone was following her. When Rachel was dropped off at her parents around 10:45, she was shot 10 times right there in the driveway. But to understand what happened there that night, we have to go back to an incident 2 years before. The reason her millionaire fiance broke off their engagement and she was suspended from teaching. That winter, in February of 2016, police found Rachel and a 17-year-old student here in a, quote, steamed-up parked car just before 2 a.m. Rachel told the responding officer that the high school football star Sheldon Jeter had just needed to talk. She said her fiancé would be angry if he found out, so the officer agreed not to file a report or press any charges. About a year later, in May of 2017, the police chief decided to, quote, file that report in case someone got wind of it. And then suddenly in October, it was leaked to Rachel's boss and the media, all sent in an anonymous email conveniently just days after her fiancé went to the station looking for more information. With that, Rachel was placed on paid suspension pending an investigation by the Department of Education. And within 2 months of said suspension, she got into a serious relationship with Sheldon's older brother, Bolton, the brother of the student she was seen with in that car. So, on the night Rachel was killed, we now know she actually got ice cream with Sheldon and Bolton's third brother. This seemingly did not go over well with Sheldon. You can see he texted his brother just 30 minutes before the murder, insinuating he was mad he wasn't invited. So, for the past 5 years, police have reportedly been building circumstantial evidence against Sheldon. They have GPS data, surveillance footage, and his history of stalking, but they cannot place her on Rachel's driveway that night. As of today, Sheldon is the only suspect in Rachel's case, and he's actually already serving life for the murder of his roommate in 2020. He shot Tyreek 7 times, again after going out for ice cream. Keely Bunker trusted a childhood best friend to walk her home, but then he took her life. If you don't know, Keely disappeared from Staffordshire, England just a few days after her 20th birthday. It was September 19th, and that night, she and her friend Monique had gone to a concert to celebrate. Now, while the initial plan was for Keely's mom to pick her up after, that didn't end up being the case. The girls decided to go out, and surveillance footage confirms they arrived at Birmingham's Snobs nightclub around 10:30 p.m. For the next 4 hours, Keely was videoed at the club, dancing, drinking, and really just having fun. Right there beside her was her childhood best friend, then 20-year-old Wesley Street. She had always called him Wes for short. By 3:30, the 3 friends had returned back home to Tamworth, and Monique actually offered for Keely to sleep over. The thing is, Keely declined. She had a teaching interview she had to be ready for, and Wes had offered to walk her the 20 minutes home. So tragically, with that, the pair headed out around 4. Keely's last known words were, quote, "I've got Wes, I'll be fine, I'll walk back with him, I'll be safe." As we know, Keely never made it home that night. She was reported missing by family when she missed her interview, and the last person she was seen with was questioned. All Altogether, Wesley said that he did walk with Keely that night, but that they parted ways at a phone booth near his house. With that, search efforts began in the area. Keely's purse was found at the local Wigington Park, so her uncle Jason decided to go and look there himself. At first, Jason reportedly saw something red, and then hair and a hand with a bracelet. An officer said he went on to hear the most horrendous scream that he could ever imagine. Again, tragically, an autopsy would confirm that Keely had been both sexually assaulted and strangled. She had marks all over her body, but most notably Wesley's DNA. In the end, Wesley said he accidentally killed Keely during consensual sex, but then blamed her for flirting with him and not wanting to do anything. As of today, he's been convicted of Keely's assault and murder, along with the assault of 3 other girls. He will face a minimum of 29 years in prison. Following a new tip, a massive search is underway for Madeleine McCann. If you know the case, you know Madeleine disappeared from her family's Portugal vacation home in May of 2007. Then, in 2022, authorities officially named Christian Brechner as a suspect in the case. On Monday morning, it was announced that based on a new tip, a renewed search will be carried out for Madeleine at a reservoir about 30 miles from her resort. This is reportedly a place that Christian used to visit, and with that, more information has come out about what he was doing when Madeleine disappeared. We now know that at 18, Christian moved himself and his girlfriend to Portugal to escape charges relating to the abuse of a child. He eventually returned to Germany to face said charges, but in 2005 was back and breaking into local vacation homes. So in that year before Madeleine's case, Christian broke into this vacation home belonging to a 72-year-old American woman. There, he assaulted and tortured her, all just minutes away from where Madeleine would go on to disappear. So come 2007, Madeleine is missing, and Christian is living in a camper van about a mile away. At this point, I think it was already clear that he was targeting vulnerable people, young or old, along with vacation homes. And as you can see, Madeleine was without supervision at an outmost unit on a busy street. Following Madeleine's disappearance, Christian conveniently rushed back to Germany and ran a kiosk next to a kindergarten for several years. Then, in 2015, he once again found himself in the vicinity of a missing girl. That year, Inga Garrick, dubbed the German Madeleine McCann, disappeared from a family barbecue. Again, conveniently, Christian Brechner was living in an abandoned factory just miles away. When police searched this property, they found thousands of horrific flash drives buried with Christian's pet dog. That being said, they didn't find any physical evidence linking him to Madeleine or Inga's case. It seems that they have decided to tack on other charges to keep him off the streets as they continue their $16 million investigation. So in regard to the search, it's the first in 8 years and was requested by German authorities where Christian is being held. It's all a bit complicated, but I believe this is because Portugal has a 15-year statute of limitations on murder charges. We finally have updates in the case of 10-year-old Lily Peters. If you've been following, you know the 4th grader was last seen with her cousin, biking home from her aunt's house in Chippewa Falls. It was only a half mile and she'd done it many times before, but when she didn't make it back, her dad reported her missing. We now know that on April 24th, Lily's 14-year-old cousin had already planned to assault and kill her. According to Carson himself, he was riding his hoverboard alongside Lily when he persuaded her to leave the trail and explore the surrounding woods. He says that after she agreed, he punched her to the ground, hit her with a stick, and then strangled her until she was no longer alive. He then assaulted her and fled the area. Now from here, Carson reportedly went back to his mom's, which, to clarify, is Lily's aunt's house where she was last seen. He reportedly took a shower and changed his clothes, and then learned that his cousin had been reported missing. He actually went back to the crime scene to hide her better, but by 9 a.m. a searcher found her body. With Carson's arrest, his family has maintained that he became depressed after his dad went to prison for possessing horribly explicit material. This is actually a letter his dad wrote to a judge requesting unsupervised visits, stating that his son is the best part of him. Last month, there was a 3-day hearing where the defense presented their case for Carson to be moved to a juvenile facility instead of being tried as an adult. They called 3 witnesses to the stand, including a professor who testified that Carson, quote, has no history of aggressive behavior, but in adolescence came into a crisis period that led to homicide. He says this one group can recover relatively quickly because in their 20s, they overcome said adolescent crisis. They also brought in the psychology director at the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, who testified that Carson wouldn't have access to the therapeutic support he needs at an adult facility. She explained that out of the 10,000 patients on their mental health caseload, they have just 140 physicians. With that, we know that the state didn't call any witnesses to the stand. May Lily hopefully get the justice she deserves, with the judge indicating he will rule on the motion no later than January 8th, 2024. Suitcase killer Heather Mack has officially pleaded guilty to her mother's murder. If you know the case, you know the heiress was 18 and pregnant when she killed her mom on their vacation to Bali. She served 7 years for the crime, but now she's back in Chicago facing charges that she planned it there with her boyfriend. We now know that in 2014, Heather's socialite mother had forbidden her from dating Tommy Schaefer. She reportedly even moved Heather to Gold Coast to steer her in the right direction, but that didn't stop her from getting pregnant with his child. Instead of being upset with her daughter, Sheila then came up with Bali as a way for them to reconnect. and really to get through everything between them since her dad died. This included more than 80 calls to police for domestic violence between the mother and daughter. So in early August, Sheila booked 2 first-class seats to Bali's 5-star St. Regis. The place was beautiful and things were seemingly going well, but then about 10 days in, she couldn't find Heather anywhere. When Sheila talked to the front desk, she learned that her daughter was actually still there in the hotel, staying in a second room that she was paying for under the name Tommy Schaefer. Instead of apologizing to her mother that night, Heather planned the unthinkable. The next morning, on August 12th, Tommy showed up to the room with a glass fruit bowl. He bludgeoned Sheila to death with it, and she tragically asphyxiated on her own blood. From here, the couple shoved Sheila into a suitcase, put that in the back of a taxi, and tried to check out of the hotel. The thing is, they couldn't. They actually fled and left the suitcase behind, with the taxi driver taking it to the police station. With the discovery of Sheila's body, a pursuit began for the media's new Bonnie and Clyde. They were tracked down to a local hotel, and while they would paint Sheila as the bad guy, cell phone evidence led to a motive: a $1.5 million trust fund. In the end, Tommy and Heather narrowly escaped the firing squad, sentenced to 18 and 10 years. The judge actually cited leniency for Heather because she was pregnant. As we know, Heather served just 7 years of her sentence and has since pleaded guilty to conspiring to kill here in the US. She says she's already done her time and hopes to serve between 0 and 15 years, with her sentencing scheduled for December.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
Prosecutors will not seek the death penalty for the murders of Kaleo and Roxy Coleman. If you don't know, Matthew Coleman is accused of killing his 2-year-old and 10-month-old because he believed his wife had passed on serpent DNA. He's confessed to shooting their kids with a spearfishing gun 29 times, yet he pleads not guilty. According to prosecutors, on August 7th, the family was just outside of their Santa Barbara home packing for a camping trip. Seemingly out of nowhere, Matthew picked up the kids, put them in the van, and drove off. Immediately, Abby Coleman called 911, but at first she didn't want an officer to come out as she thought they would all be back soon. That following day, on August 8th, Abby changed her mind. She reported her family missing and, with police, used Find My iPhone to track her husband's last known location. With this, it became clear Matthew had driven Kaleo and Roxy into Mexico. FBI at the border was alerted to be on the lookout, but by this point, he was already carrying out his plan. As confirmed by surveillance footage, around 3 a.m. on August 9th, the three were seen leaving a Rosarito hotel. From here, Matthew just started driving. At 3:12, he texted Abby that things have been rough, but he's finally gotten some clarity. Tragically, we know that shortly after that message was sent, the kids were killed on the outskirts of a remote ranch. Matthew attempted to hide their bodies and then disposed of the weapon and bloody clothing in a nearby creek. Now, while the kids were found by 7:30 that morning, back at home, no one knew. When Abby woke up that morning, she got Matthew's message about clarity. She responded with this at 9:24 a.m. and then alerted police that his iPhone was headed back towards the border. Obviously, when Matthew tried to cross back over, the kids weren't with him. In recorded interviews, he discussed wild conspiracy theories, along with how he could communicate with his children. He said 10-month-old Roxy told him Abby was abusing them and that he had to kill them to save the world. So again, today Matthew still pleads not guilty, with the most recent update being that he will not face the death penalty. Court records also reveal that he and Abby shared mutual interest in these theories, but his beliefs reportedly grew stronger. Investigators say that they have and will continue to treat Abby as a victim in the case. With the prime suspect's extradition to the U.S., this is what we know about what happened to Natalee Holloway. In May of 2005, 124 classmates and 7 chaperones made the trip from Alabama to Aruba. They left just 2 weeks after senior prom on May 26th and returned on May 30th. Except for Natalee. Natalee never got to live out her full ride to Alabama or pursue med school because just moments after this photo was taken, she disappeared. That night was a Sunday and the group's 4th night at the Holiday Inn. They again spent it drinking and having fun, but this time at local restaurant Carlos and Charlie's. So this is Natalee again there on the left, where she danced up until close at 1 a.m. At that point, most of the group headed back to the hotel, but she was seen getting into a car with 3 guys she'd met the night before. Joran Vandersloot, a Dutch international student, along with 2 local brothers, Deepak and Satish. Come the following morning, Natalee's friend found that she hadn't returned to their room. They thought maybe she'd slept in another one, but then she missed the flight. One chaperone stayed back to wait for her, while another broke the news to her family. By nightfall, Natalee's loved ones had arrived to Aruba on a rented jet. They got word from Natalee's friends that she'd left with these guys, so they asked a woman at the hotel if she knew him. She did, and within 4 hours, the family had provided police with Joran's full name and address. So while Joran initially told police that he didn't know Natalee, he then said he'd taken her to the local lighthouse because she wanted to see sharks. From here, he's actually told several versions of events. That he dropped her off at her hotel, that she started convulsing on the beach, or that he sold her into trafficking. Unfortunately, local authorities had made up their mind. No charges stuck, with the Deputy Chief Police of Aruba saying, quote, "We feel strongly that she probably went into shock or something happened to her system with the alcohol, and she just collapsed." So with that, Euron quietly went back to school, and in 2010 falsely told Natalie's family that he would take them to her body for $25,000. He took that money and flew to Peru, where he met and murdered 21-year-old business student Stephanie Flores. He was convicted and sentenced to 28 years, which leads us to today. Last week, Peru approved Euron's extradition to the US, where he will come to face fraud charges. His lawyer is reportedly worried will tack on charges directly related to Natalie. Connor Gibson has officially been sentenced for the murder of his younger sister. Amber and her brother were placed into the same foster family at 3 and 5, but even then, it was clearly weren't a good mix. Their foster parents actually feared them being alone together, and so at 14, she had to move into a children's home. As the court heard, Amber was so excited on November 26th when Connor called the house and asked if she could hang out. Staff there encouraged her not to go, but she had also recently been assaulted under their care. She trusted her older brother and ultimately left with him on foot. Now, as confirmed by surveillance footage, the pair was seen walking over the bridge of a local woodland at 9:57 p.m. But nearly 2 hours later, you can see Connor walked back over that same bridge alone. He then paused for a moment over a fence as if to catch his breath and began to send a series of disturbing Snapchats. 1 to 5 friends to say he seriously needed help with something, and another to Amber herself asking if she was okay. Now by 12:50 that morning, Connor, quote, had returned home looking like he fell in a ditch, but would say he just got into an argument with his sister. He then disposed of his bloody clothing in the yard, and at 1:30 messaged his friends again that he'd actually figured everything out. As we know, when Amber didn't return home that Friday night, she was immediately reported missing. And in something I can't even begin to understand, a terrible person found her body. It was a local man by the name of Stephen Corrigan, and instead of contacting police, he assaulted her and re-hid her remains. When police did officially find Amber Sunday morning, it was tragically apparent that she had been beaten, assaulted, and strangled. But even as the news broke, her brother still didn't seem to be worried and posted social media tributes in her name. He went so far as to schedule an interview with the News and only missed it because he had been arrested. This fall, Connor finally went to trial, where it was revealed that he and Amber grew up watching violence from their biological father. The judge took the entirety of his troubled background into consideration, but also the statements of his foster parents and former classmates. They said he, quote, talked about killing people and even threatened to rip the baby out of a pregnant woman's stomach. With that, Connor has officially been sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years. But there's also more, as there should be. Stephen Corrigan, the man who found and re-hid Amber's body, has been sentenced to 9 years for assault and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. And Jamie Starr, the man who assaulted Amber while she was staying at that group home, has been sentenced to 10.5 years. Even the kid's biological father has been sentenced to 10 years for a string of assaults going back to when they still lived with him. Whether all of this equals justice, I don't know, as there's no doubt Amber was failed for all of her very short life. Again, Connor has to serve 22 years before he could be eligible for parole.